here this evening. Glad you're here on a spring break week for a lot of people. We are tonight going to be focusing on the idea of being merciful. Blessed are the merciful. And so we'll go through that verse and talk about that a lot. I'm going to begin tonight by telling you that I apologize for about 2 weeks ago. I jokingly said I had like an hour and 15 minutes worth of stuff and then did not hear the second bell. Okay? We have that resolved tonight. When I first started at Agape, I had a tendency to want to preach too long. It's easy to preach too long about something that you're really excited about. And so I would get up, and the very first time I preached about Agape, I preached over an hour. And my wife, when we got back in the car, Amy said, "You can't do that." And so I cut and cut and cut. And the next time I got down to like 45 minutes. And she said, "It's not going to happen." And so I kept trying. And finally we agreed on the plan that we're going to implement tonight. And that is, if I go too long, Amy goes, "Let's all stand and start the invitation song." And so you guys know if she starts an invitation song, I'm going too long. Tonight, again, we're talking about being merciful. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to go through a really quick lesson in New Testament Greek. Some of you guys probably know more Greek than I do. I went through and had to take 2 full years of it at LCU. And to say that it was the bane of my existence would only be seconded to the short time I took Hebrew. But in New Testament Greek, as we go through, we're going to be looking at Matthew 7 tonight, English Standard Version pretty much all the way through. And the New Testament version, the English version of that says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Looking at those, there are 2 Greek words there. And one, and I'm going to tell you this one I can get close to, and it is elaimonus. Elaimonus, close. Only 2 occurrences of that Greek adjective in the New Testament, interestingly. One in Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, and the only other occurrence is in Hebrews 2:17, where it talks about Jesus being merciful as a high priest. I felt like that was an important exception, so I wanted to remember that one, so there it is. When you go to the blessed are the merciful, there are 27 occurrences of the word merciful in the English ESV. In the New Testament, there are 6 occurrences of that word, merciful, but only 6. Of those, interestingly, only 4 use a word other than the elaimonus. And so we wanted to go through those really quickly. With the exceptions outnumbering those others that we're focusing on, it seems noteworthy that we'd look at them, especially because, and I know that you guys notice this, we tend to use a lot of words, like there are a lot of words in the Greek Bible for love. And we talk about that all the time, but you'd never think about merciful. There are at least a couple more, and we're going to talk about the illustrations there. Luke 6, verse 36 says, "Be merciful as your Father is merciful." And again, that is a completely different Greek word. It's tied more closely to the idea of pity. Have pity on the people. Have pity on people as your Father has pity on you. The next would be Luke 18, verse 13, one of my favorite verses of the New Testament. And that's where the tax collector is standing in front of God, away from the Pharisee, and he says, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." That's a completely different word, and it's more closely tied to atonement. And so really what he's saying there is, God, make atonement for me, a sinner. You're going to see these 2 words used again. The idea of atonement in the Hebrews 8:12 passage, where it talks about the Lord is going to be merciful toward their iniquities, referring back to the Old Testament. And then finally, again, James 5, verse 11. It goes back to the one that was referred to as more of a pity, or alluded to pity more. And it talks about, you've seen how the Lord is compassionate and merciful, or he has pity. And so those are the other exceptions there. If you go to the second part of that verse, "For they shall receive mercy," again, 32 occurrences of the Greek verb in the New Testament. All 32 of those are translated as something having to do with have mercy. Couple of illustrations there that I'll show you. The blind beggar Bartimaeus heard it was Jesus of Nazareth coming past, and he said, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus entered a village, and he met 10 lepers there, and they cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And each one of the occurrences of that, those 32 occurrences, all come from the very same word. So it's kind of interesting, the fact that mercy has several different versions, but being merciful, or merciful does, mercy has really only one, or having mercy. Again, going back to the English translation, 157 occurrences of the word mercy in the ESV, 56 of them in the New Testament, and pretty much according to course, only one of those doesn't employ a form of that verb that I cannot pronounce. So I'm not going to try to fake you out on that one. That's from Hebrews chapter 9, verse 5. And again, it's tied to that word that's closely related to atonement, talking about the Ark of the Covenant, the cherubim overseeing the mercy or the atonement seat. And so that's kind of a history of where that word comes from and where they come from. Interestingly, I'm going to tell you guys, I love The Princess Bride. I love the lessons that you can learn from The Princess Bride. You know, don't go into the fire swamp. Don't mess with the ROUSSs. All those kind of things. One of the ones that's the best line in the movie, honestly, is, "I do not think that word means what you think it means." And I'm not sure in mercy that we really understand what that word means. If I was going to ask you to define first century mercy or being merciful, how would you define it? And I went through and played with the idea, and here's what I'm going to tell you. If you want to use synonyms and just give me one word, go for it. How are you going to define mercy from the New Testament first century version? I've got an hour and 15 minutes to sit here.
I'll use forgiveness.
Okay, forgiveness, very good. Others?
Compassion.
Compassion, excellent. All right, I'm going to take you to a couple of really incredible Greek tools. One is the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, and it was written by a guy named Cattell. And honestly, if you go back to any Bible program in our brotherhood and you ask, what's the best Bible dictionary around? They're probably going to give you Cattell, but they're also going to maybe tell you that it is somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. So I happen to have the little $100 version that was kind of abridged. And go into that, they defined it as compassion, benevolent, active pity, mercy involving thought and action. And when it's tied to a New Testament believer, it's seen as the result of an indwelling Holy Spirit. And so they would say that those who are in the New Testament, those who are mentioned in the New Testament and are believers, they're the ones who might really illustrate and show, live out New Testament mercy as we've read about. The other is the Complete Word Study Dictionary out of the New Testament. Again, another great resource. It's defined it as loving kindness, sympathy, pity, an attitude that God requires in us based on the fact that He has it for us. Concern for both the eternal and the temporal welfare. And that's going to take us, honestly, a little bit more into what we would look at as a 21st century definition. If I ask you to define mercy today, tell me what mercy means to you when you hear that word. Give me a context.
Submission.
Okay, submission, very good. What if you took it out of the context of just trying to use it inside the Bible again? And let's go to the 21st century, and I'm going to toss out 3 words to you, and you tell me what you think of. An act of mercy. What's that mean? Throwing yourself on the mercy of the court. I mean, we're really familiar with those ideas. we think about those. We don't really think about it in terms of what it means as far as mercy and merciful to us. Going back to the old standard of Merriam-Webster, compassion shown to an offender who is subject to another person's power. I'm pleading for mercy, pleading for the mercy of the court. That's really the second one. Lenient or compassionate treatment, an act of divine favor or compassion for someone who's higher than you. A judge has mercy on your soul. And then finally, the last definition, and going on to pull up 6 of the different synonyms, compassionate treatment of those who are in distress, including works or acts of mercy, forgiveness, empathy, kindness, compassion, grace, sympathy. Those are words that we're all familiar with. And we're really maybe a little bit more comfortable using those words than we are the idea of mercy. Because again, mercy seems to involve a God-type concept for us, I think. The Bible, both Greek and English, clearly shows 2 very distinct but very related aspects of mercy. Acts of forgiveness and acts of compassion. And guys, I'm going to tell you, I really, really wrestled with that for a while. I went in thinking mercy, and I read the verses, and I thought of mercy as always being involving compassion. God, have mercy on me. Lord, have mercy on me. Have I? And then suddenly you throw in some of that New Testament stuff, like the tax collector standing by the side of the Pharisee, have mercy on my soul, forgive me. And those 2 concepts, that was tough for me. I don't know if it is for you at all, but I had to reconcile the fact that there were 2 different, really related, but distinct concepts. And so we're going to go through tonight and we're going to talk about those a little bit. What's the common denominator between those 2 aspects of mercy?
Love.
Love is excellent. Okay? That is a common denominator. Action, excellent. Grace. Man, these are all exactly what we're looking for. I'm going to tell you guys, in defining it, both focus on giving something that's unearned and it can't or won't be repaid. For an act of forgiveness, we don't deserve forgiveness. We don't deserve forgiveness from God. And yet He gives that to us. And we talked about grace and mercy and all those words that you guys just threw out. And that's exactly what that act of forgiveness is. An act of compassion. Doing something for someone that they can't pay you for and that they really may not deserve. Okay? You guys okay with that? We're going to talk about them a little more in depth, but there's one aspect that we need to be aware of. While one aspect may come more naturally to you, like maybe you are an active forgiveness person. This is a father who forgave in a court of law the man who killed his son. He asked for special permission before the young man was sentenced to talk to the young man, and the judge asked the lawyers, everyone agreed, and he went up and they talked to each other. In fact, right before he was sentenced for killing the young man's son. The young man's son was a pizza delivery man. 3 young people killed him, I believe in Detroit, for a total of $60. So that's what his life was worth. And that father went to that court and he forgave that young man in front of the judge and everyone else who was there. Maybe it's an act of compassion that's more natural for you. These are 2 students. I've forgotten exactly what university they go to, but 2 students. The young student there, you can see him as rain falls coming down and basically washing them away. He takes his umbrella and he covers the other young student, the young lady, who is confined to a wheelchair. An act of compassion, an act of goodness, of giving something that might never be returned. While one aspect may come more naturally to you, either an act of compassion or an act of forgiveness, the secret is mercy is really not an either or, Mercy is a both and. And when we start to analyze and take that Greek word apart, God didn't say, hey, listen, Keith, I know that you're a very forgiving soul, so you don't have to do this compassion thing. That's not for you. And he didn't pick out someone else and say, hey, you know what, Matthew, I know that you, on the other hand, man, you're very compassionate. I've seen you build houses in Mexico. I've seen you go and do all kinds of things. But you don't have to really be that forgiving, because after all, the compassion part's going to weigh out for you. God didn't say that to any of us. And so we've got two pieces of a puzzle that have to fit together, and we may not have to do each the same amount. I don't measure the amount of compassion that I have each day and try to get the same amount of forgiveness in my life. But I do have to have that caveat in my life. Couple of verses. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your Father will also forgive you. But if you don't forgive others, neither is your Father going to forgive your trespasses. And then finally, the Ephesians 4 passage, be kind and compassionate to one another. The ESV calls that tender-hearted. NIV uses the word compassionate, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. And I'll tell you, if you go back and look at all of the different verses, and obviously there are a lot of them in the New Testament, if you look at all the different verses that pull out compassionate, you're going to see an incredible correlation with the idea of forgiveness there. Those two ideas are so closely tied together that even though we may be able in English in the 21st century to separate those out and to think about how those are going to impact us separately, in the New Testament, they were so closely tied that it was tougher for them to do that, I believe. Mercy is an act of forgiveness. Specifically, Colossians 3, verse 12 and 13 talks about forgiveness and compassion. Put on then compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you. So you must also forgive. Forgiving your enemies. These are real life pictures, guys, most of them. Another picture of a young mother. Her son was killed. He was killed by a group of 3 young men as well. She went to the trial every day. She was there as a witness for her son. At the end of that trial, she, like the gentleman before, went to the judge and asked if she would be able to address the young men who had killed her son. He allowed her to do that, and she went and she talked to each one of those young men. When she talked to those young men, she made a promise, and someone used the word action back here. This mother promised not just to forgive them, which she had done, but she took that and she put an action to it. And she now goes to the prison on a regular basis to visit each one of those young men, because she said it's only through making them better people when they're released that my son's life will have had meaning. And I thought, man, that's a perfect picture of forgiving your enemies. Forgiving your boss or your coworkers. You know, maybe you were looked over for a promotion. Maybe you were given a dirty job and you had to do it instead of someone else. As much as we would like to think that it doesn't happen, bullying happens in the workplace just like it does in elementary, junior high, and senior highs. And so maybe you were a victim of bullying, and being able to forgive that boss or coworker, that may be a necessary step in your healing and not just theirs. Being able to forgive your aging parents or your adult children. I would love to tell you about all the times that my children have sat down with us and talked to us about things that we've made mistakes in the past. Our son is especially good at that. He can remember things that I didn't even know happened. But he's talked to us about those, and we've become, I believe, better parents. And at the same time, we've been able to talk to our parents about some things. My sister and I had a conversation today about some things that had happened in our childhood. And I want you to know I'm going to give you one really quick piece of advice. It's free. There will not be a test at the end of this. If you have something that you need to deal with a family member, especially an aging parent, do it. Because it's much harder to deal with those things after the parent has passed on than you're the one left holding that bag. And forgiveness, while you can do the forgiveness thing, it's tough to let that person know, obviously, that that happened. Forgiving your spouse, that's obviously one that we all need to deal with. That's difficult, and yet we need to do it. I read an article that said basically, forgiveness of spouse offers two options. Either you do forgive and your marriage can continue and grow, or you don't forgive and your marriage hits this point of stasis where nothing's moving. And if you're not growing, then you're dying. And so that was really an interesting thing for me to try to put that in the act of mercy as forgiveness. Forgiving yourself, it's been suggested that forgiving yourself is the hardest person. You are the hardest person for you to forgive. To forgive, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even know for sure that forgive and forget even exist. We talk about it as if it does. We use that and we throw it around, oh, forgive and forget, forgive and forget. And it's nearly like one of those things that you can beat somebody over the head with. You're not forgetting. You didn't forget. You're throwing. Forgiving yourself is even harder, I believe, in that context. And so mercy is an act of forgiveness. You have to forgive yourself to be able to forgive others, I believe. And then others. I don't know if you have other illustrations, but do you have illustrations of forgiveness that you would like to share? You don't have to, but this is a great time.
I had an ex-boyfriend that was not the nicest person. Police were involved, etc. And I was able to forgive him after getting away from him finally. And that's why, for me, people say it's so hard to forgive people. I'm like, all these things happen. I don't hate him. I don't have any feelings towards him other than I'd rather not see him. But if I do, I'm not going to be rude or, hope he's well. I just don't want to, I said, if I can do that, then somebody who slighted you at work or whatever, that, think about it, because it's only bothering you. It's not bothering them. They don't care, typically. So
I think that's an excellent illustration. And I think it does illustrate, too, the point that you're not forgetting. One of the things that as a marriage counselor I have struggled with is in any way suggesting, and this may be completely wrong, but to suggest that you forgive and you forget, I'm not sure that forgetting is exactly the right thing if you're talking about a relationship, especially where you've been abused. And so I really struggle with that. I'm going to be very candid with you guys and tell you that's not an easy thing for me personally to suggest to an abused spouse, whether it's a husband or a wife.
I don't think it's forgetting so much as it is letting it go to the back of your mind, so to speak, not bringing it up constantly. Because if you're doing that, then you really haven't forgiven. Because if we all face slights and we don't learn from them, which you have to remember to learn from something, then we're just going to repeat those issues. So.
And I think I'm going to take it and make this something for Amy and I. I think that's the difference is, if I forget to put up my clothes at night and they just lay there in the middle of the bathroom floor, okay, that's one thing. But if I'm abusing my spouse, that's something altogether different. And so there are different ways that you can apply that idea of forgiveness and being able to forget and forgive. Going back to the Colossians 3 passage we read earlier, put on then compassionate hearts in addition to the forgiveness idea. And I'm going to tell you guys something that I realized. I wouldn't share this with very many people except for my closest friends right here in this room and the 3 others who are watching on video. This might be, if we all have spiritual gifts, this may be mine. And this particular part of mercy, I may struggle with the forgiveness some. All of us struggle with some things. But with this is something I'm good at, and I don't know why. Picture here is very reminiscent of a trip that I made in 2017 to Perdido Beach. I was headed down for a conference for the Association of Child Care Providers in the state of Alabama. And as I'm driving down, you guys have driven to the beach, and you know how people drive. It's like if I don't get there first, my beach is going to be gone. And I was driving to the beach, and there was a family of 4 who passed in a van, a suburban SUV. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the right word. An SUV that looked just like this. And I don't know if you've ever thought something like this, but I thought to myself, in a few miles, I'm going to see those people, and they're going to have gotten in trouble. And I probably didn't go 10 miles further, and the wheels on the SUV were still spinning. Mom had rolled the SUV 3 times. There were all sorts of things that resulted from that. But I'd been trained in how to handle that type of crisis. So I get out, I put the things out to block the traffic. I go and I start to help. Mom is outside the vehicle part of the way because she didn't have a seatbelt on. Daughter is inside the car. I'm not going to go into too many details here, but she was not completely inside the car, and she had been crushed. She was still alive. Son was in the back seat, strung in and in his seatbelt still. And so a couple of guys and I broke out the back windshield and climbed inside and pulled the son out and got him out there on the grass. We went around to the other side again where Mom was, and it became very obvious that daughter was in a great deal of physical distress and was probably not going to make it. And we were able to move the daughter and the mother to where mother could hold the daughter. I didn't think anything about that, guys. That's just me. Amy will tell you, whether it's a motorcycle that T-bones a car in Dallas-Fort Worth, and I'm out and suddenly I'm there holding this person, or I am climbing inside a car in Midland, Texas, also had been T-boned, and I get inside. My best friend shows up, jerks the car open and starts to yell at me. He, by the way, is a member of an ambulance team. He begins to yell at me to get out, and I said, I am holding this guy's head to where the bleeding will stop. And he yells at me to get out again, and I don't do it. And finally, the 3rd time, he grabs me, and I don't want you. He was a tiny little man who had a powerful big grasp, and I used to have some hair on my chest. And he grabbed me and he threw me out of that car, and he dragged me to the fire truck, and he set me on the side of it, and he gave me a lecture about doing what he told me to do, and he meant it, and he meant it now. And I thought, man, I was being compassionate. And then he shows me the fire underneath the car. And so the guy did get out and that kind of thing, but still, that's my thing. And you all have things too. You help people. Here's irony personified. This was not a crisis. 1983, Lubbock, Texas, Loop 280. Going around the loop to go to church at the Northside Church of Christ. I was there. I was the college and young adults minister. I was loving it. And I was going to teach a class, yea, verily, I was going to teach a class over the Good Samaritan. You remember the guy who had several people pass by. Family of 3. One of the children was younger than this because it was a baby. They were standing outside and trying to fix a flat. And I reasoned with myself and with my wife that I had to get to class and I had to get to church and teach my class. And I drove past those people, a young mother, 2 children, because I needed to get to church and do my Christian duty. I'm going to tell you, that's the kind of thing that just sticks with you. You climb inside a car and you don't mind the fire and all that kind of stuff, but you ignore a young mom there who needed you so desperately. You guys, I would kind of like to say, I hope you've done some of the same kind of stupid stuff, but I pray to God in some ways that I'm the only one that's ever done anything like that. I want you to meet Floyd Dean Shannon. Floyd Dean Shannon is a national hero. You may not know him, but he is a Delta Airlines attendant. There was a young lady flying from Charlotte to JFK, and on that flight they hit turbulence and she freaked out. She was not ready. And so how did Floyd Dean Shannon handle that? Floyd Dean Shannon walked up, sat down beside her seat, and other than the time that he finally had to get up and go to the back to get in the jump seat to land, he was with her each step of the way. And every time there was a sound, every time there was a bump, every time there was anything that was unexpected, he was there beside her, offering her support. He, by the way, didn't shoot that picture, obviously, but the person who was behind did, and complimented him to Delta Airlines. And suddenly he went viral. I don't know if you've met the Apron Guy or not. If not, you should. He's an internet sensation right now. The Apron Guy is wearing, if you can focus your eyes just a bit, he's wearing an apron there that has a picture of his wife and him on the day they got married, because his wife has Alzheimer's. And every morning when she wakes up, she doesn't remember that she's married to him. But he wears an apron as he fixes her breakfast, as he brings her breakfast, or she comes downstairs to have breakfast. He's wearing that apron and he's reminding her. Do you remember who we are? Usually it starts with, who is this woman? She has no idea. Who is this guy? Who is that handsome guy? Well, that's you. You know who that beautiful woman is? That's you. We got married 62 years ago. That's an act of compassion. You guys probably have heard of Rodney Smith. He is a local hero. He has a nonprofit now. He goes from door to door and mows lawns for free with kids now, teaching them how to be good citizens, how to have compassion on the people around them. And he does that all for free for veterans, for senior citizens, and for widows, I believe, are his three categories. He's now going across the United States, and they are starting state by state and even city by city chapters of his nonprofit to do the very same thing. I'm going to tell you about my son, Colby. I told you he had talked to his mom and I about several things we did wrong. I'm going to tell you about something he did right. My son, Colby, is an incredible father. He's also a great husband. And my granddaughter was about 1.5 years old, maybe 1 year old. And she came down with the most horrible case of croup. And so she couldn't sleep at night, and she didn't sleep well during the day. Colby's wife, my daughter-in-law, Katie, didn't sleep because she didn't sleep. And so on a Friday when he could possibly do it and still go, but not be hindered at work, Colby stays up. And on Saturday, Colby stays up and he takes care of our granddaughter because mama needed sleep more than he did. Guys, it doesn't have to be something big. You don't have to climb into the back of a car that has a kid and trapped upside down in it. You don't have to even be mowing lawns for people. But you can do little things. You can care for the widows in their distress, James 1:27. You can care for the orphans in their distress. Now, I'm going to tell you quite honestly, that's a little bit of a shameless plug, okay? I don't know if you know anything about Agape of North Alabama. That is agapecares.org, okay? But we are a nonprofit. We deal with children who have been abused and neglected. We work with them. We work with birth mothers. We work with adoptive and foster families. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't fit into one of those, you think to yourself, you know what? I can't be a foster family because not everyone can. Can they, Mr. Carr? Not everybody can be a foster family. But you know what you can do? you can help a foster family, because our foster families are incredible people, but they do need help occasionally. Some churches will take, some classes will take a foster family and they'll say, you know what, we're going to bring you dinner one night a month. We're going to bring board games over for you and a movie. They stay home and they just do things with their children, but they've not had to organize it and that kind of thing. If you need a place to fit to work with children and families, give us a call at our office. One is this is where I expect you to really jump in. And you've got maybe 3 minutes, maybe not quite that long.
Some of the littlest things can matter the most. I happen to, something that just sticks with me is out grocery shopping. I walked out, put my groceries away, and I noticed a gentleman trying to get his daughter out of the car, and all the things, and it's just pouring down, right? So I ran over and gave him my umbrella, and I gave him my somewhat dry cart to put his daughter. It was a little, maybe 6-month-old baby, and he was just like, thank you, because he was trying to get all the bag, being a brand new dad. I'm assuming it was probably his first kid, because just the nerves.
Okay.
But you could just see the relief, and it's just little things like that.
That's excellent, because you're exactly right. It is little bitty things.
So, Danny, whenever you eat at Phil Sandoval's, there's always somebody, every time you go there, they want a handout. And so there's a guy without a leg, so I give 20, but on a different twist, last December, I was at Crickett's, and there was this family of 13 kids that came in, and I talked to Jen. If anybody's at Crickett's, everybody knows Jen. She doesn't take your order. She knows what you want. And so I asked her, I said, is that all their kids? And she said, yeah. So I took money out of my wallet and I gave it as I paid. I said, here, apply that to this family of 13.
That's incredible. And again, it's not a huge thing, but it's so big to the people who are touched. I'm going to tell you one today, and it was, guys, I've got the mantra now. And believe it or not, you're going to laugh at me, but there are times when I say to myself out loud in my truck, have mercy, choose mercy, choose mercy. This truck is on county line, and it's decided to cut me off as I go around the little loopy thing to get onto 565, and I can speed it up because, guys, I have a monster truck, and I can speed it up and I can cut him completely off. Choose mercy. Choose mercy. And I want to encourage you guys, think about that as we go through. Choose mercy, choose mercy. There's a lot of questions, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did have them just in case I didn't have enough material. Okay. Next Wednesday, Pure in Heart, Zach's going to be leading us, and I encourage you to be here. It's going to be a great class. This is one that's really important for all of us. I've enjoyed teaching tonight. Hope you guys have enjoyed something. Take it home, and as you leave, choose mercy. Seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.